Senator Win Gatchalian, chair of the Senate Finance Committee, had earlier asked the DBM to be more detailed in scrutinizing projects being added into the National Expenditure Program. He categorized questionable items in the 2026 NEP with half a dozen red flags, including DPWH projects with no station number, projects divided into phases with similar amounts, projects with phrase with packages and found in the same area, projects with costs that have been rounded off, and projects that have reappeared in the 2026 NEP from the 2025 General Appropriations Act. Well, with us for more is Senate Chair of the Committee on Finance, Senator Win Gatchalian. Good to see you, Sen Win. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Kathy. Good morning to our televiewers.
So that's 700 pages and about 15,000 line items to go over in the DPWH budget alone. It's a tall order for both Sec Mina and Sec Vince. Can they weed out and clean up in 2 weeks or less? What do you think?
Well, it will be a challenge. For example, if they have to go through each and every project, you have to go back to the original documents. Making sure that each project will have a feasibility study, detailed engineering, coordination with the local government unit, and so on and so forth. Those are itemized in the DBM circular that was issued for 2026. Basically, the circular is saying no project will be endorsed in the 2026 NEP, 2026 National Expenditure Program, without all of those detailed documents.
It is indeed a process flow, and assuming that they do get it in 2 weeks or less, you and fellow legislators will still have to ensure that the whole budget is aligned with the macroeconomic assumptions, the growth targets that are set by the DBCC. So how will the Senate ensure congruence, especially given the wish list tendencies of some agencies?
Well, Kathy, the first order of business is assuring that the 2026 budget is corruption-free and the projects are indeed well studied and with feasibility studies, and the projects will be felt by the people. That's the first order of business, because you cannot go to the macroeconomic assumptions, alignment with the Philippine Development Plan, if you have projects that are spurious and anomalous. For example, ghost projects, then that will not redound to anything at the end. In fact, the Department of Finance said that those anomalous projects took away almost 118 billion pesos from our economy, because obviously they're ghost projects. So the first order of business is assuring that the projects are credible and well studied.
Well, to get to corruption-free, there's got to be a master plan. I mean, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the master plan for the flood control program. Shouldn't the DPWH come up with that first before budgeting for flood control projects that one wouldn't assume to be ghost?
That's the direction, Kathy. We have river basins all over the country, and those river basins are supposedly the source of flooding in our different parts of the country. And because of that, there should be a master plan per river basin. That should be the bare minimum and updated throughout the years. We will also look for that because the feasibility study should be aligned with the master plan of that river basin. So, in other words, when you propose flood control projects, you have to make sure that the people can feel the mitigating effects and can feel that the flood control projects is indeed working for them.
And all this inquiry and the challenge that we have in 2 weeks or less happening at a time we've got rising debt service costs as well as limited fiscal space. I know that you've pointed out that every Filipino now owes 142,000 pesos because of the country's debt. So with the problem of debt service costs rising and limited fiscal space, how does the Senate plan to balance social protection with infrastructure priorities, especially if we forgo the new taxes, as Secretary Recto has suggested?
Correct. Well, the strategy of the administration is to outgrow debt. If you look at the projected GDP growth, it has to grow between 6 to 7%. Unfortunately, for the last 3 years, we've been growing less than 5.5%. So, in other words, we're not outgrowing debt, but albeit debt is outgrowing our economy. And we need to be very prudent in terms of addressing fiscal deficit, because that's the culprit If you have an elevated fiscal deficit, definitely we will borrow more. And if you borrow more, that will translate into debt service in our budget. We're now averaging about 15% of our total expenditure to debt service, meaning that doesn't go to any projects, but it goes to just paying off creditors. So we need to balance that. It's a tall order, but we have to do it as we go along. The first strategy is to make sure that the projects will redound to our economy. Construction still remains to be the biggest multiplier at double-digit multiplying effect. But if you have ghost project, then there's nothing to multiply. No, so we have to make sure that those construction projects, those infra projects, are realized.
And we're running up against time, 2 weeks or less. What are the chances then that we end up with a re-enacted budget?
Well, on the part of the Senate, the senators agreed that we will continue to conduct our budget briefings. I understand that the House has this intention of returning the budget to the executive, but on the part of the Senate, we will continue to conduct our budget briefings to make sure that everything is on time. And if the executive will change the National Expenditure Program of some agencies, then we will have to just conduct another briefing on that. But so far, we will be conducting our briefing as scheduled.
Should you not be preparing for the possibility of a reenacted budget, though?
I don't want to think that ahead yet. I am trying to be more optimistic because reenacted budget will definitely have some effects to our economic growth, considering that you cannot spend for capital outlay. So as much as possible, we have to do everything we can to get our budget approved by end of the year.
That's true, because it reminds us of the cautionary tales of the repeated reenactment. When you go back to the previous administrations under, say, former President Gloria Arroyo's term, it led to delayed services, stalled infra development, enhanced executive discretion over funds, even greater corruption risks. So this is a scenario that you wouldn't want happening, would you?
Well, the biggest impact will be there's no capital outlay. There's no new projects. So you cannot build new roads. You cannot build new classrooms. You cannot build anything new, basically. And government spending is about 15 to 20% of our economy. So if you take out infra spending, that will definitely impact economic growth because government is one of the biggest drivers of economic growth.
Apart from the impact on economic growth, there is a concern over political patronage. Just looking back to the president, he explicitly said in his State of the Nation address that he will not hesitate to resort to a reenacted budget if the 2026 version is not fully aligned with the National Expenditures Program. You know, critics point out that a reenacted budget would only spur patronage politics, moving the power of the purse away from the legislative branch into the executive of government. What do you make of it?
Well, that's insofar as savings is concerned. No? There's a lot of caveat to that statement. Not completely, it doesn't completely shift to the executive department. That some amounts will be shifted to the executive department. Nevertheless, if you look at the totality is almost 1.6 trillion pesos of our budget goes to infra spending. If you take that out, you're taking out 1.6 trillion pesos out of our economy in terms of infra spending. And the multiplier effect of infra is around 10 times. So you're removing almost 10 trillion pesos out of our economy. You know, so that's, for me, that's a much bigger worry in terms of driving our economy.
As a final point, Sen Win, what is that one structural flaw in the budget process that you want reformed before the 2026 GAA is passed?
Well, we have to go back to the basics, Kathy. Let's remove the syndicates in DPWH. It really starts with the syndicates, and because the syndicates are conniving with the contractors, and these people. If you look at the budget process, it's the district engineer that suggests all those line items that we see in the National Expenditure Program. So if those people are conniving with one another, those connivances will end up in our National Expenditure Program. Then you have a budget that is suggested by people who are conniving to create corruption at the district level.
Could the syndicates, the connivances, go beyond the DPWH?
It can. I am not ruling out that possibility. It can. That's why the independent commission will look at the entire ecosystem of how projects are being suggested and projects are being tackled. So the independent commission should look at from not step one, but step zero, all the way to implementing the project.
Well, tough tasks ahead. Sen Win, we'll be watching. Thank you so much for the time. Senator Win Gatchalian of the Senate Finance Committee.